To fight in-work poverty and protect vulnerable workers, most governments rely on a single, universally accepted economic tool. The state drops a hard legal floor beneath its labor market, declaring a minimum hourly rate that every employer must pay. Yet one of the wealthiest, most highly developed nations on Earth rejects this policy. Singapore has no national minimum wage. This lack of a wage floor became a glaring issue in the mid-2000s. As rapid globalization flooded the country with cheap foreign labor, wages for Singapore's bottom earners stagnated. Workers like Aziza, a single mother working night shifts as a cleaner at Changi Airport, found themselves taking home just $600 a month. The immense national wealth generated by Singapore's economic rise was bypassing its most vulnerable citizens. The government had to build a safety net, but it refused to install the very legal wage floor the rest of the world relied on. This data visualization shows exactly why they refused. Classical economic theory warns that a flat minimum wage is a blunt instrument. When you mandate a rigid wage floor, you force overhead costs up across the board, pushing industries with tight margins into the red. For an open economy heavily reliant on exports, artificial wage spikes would destroy global cost competitiveness, forcing export volumes to contract. If you force employers to pay a higher flat rate regardless of their financial health, their immediate response is to fire the very people the policy is meant to help, older workers or those with lower skills, to offset the mandate. A high-end tech firm and a local landscaping company operate on vastly different productivity levels and profit margins. A uniform labor floor fails to account for these gaps, placing the heaviest burden on the sectors least able to afford it. Singapore realized it needed a surgical tool, a way to raise wages at the bottom of the income ladder without triggering mass layoffs or crippling its export dominance. In 2012, they rolled out an alternative, the Progressive Wage Model, or PWM. Instead of blanketing the whole economy, the government targeted specific, historically depressed industries like cleaning, landscaping, and security. Looking at this diagram, you can see the defining structural difference. The state doesn't impose a flat floor. Instead, it mandates a multi-tiered wage ladder specific to that sector. But there is a condition. To climb that ladder and unlock the next legally mandated wage tier, workers must complete specific state-certified training and take on the expanded responsibilities. By linking pay to skills, like training a manual cleaner to operate a mechanized floor scrubber, the worker can cover more ground in less time. This increased output generates the value needed to cover the higher labor cost. By directly linking pay to skills, the progressive wage model solves the classic dilemma. Wages go up, but because worker productivity goes up simultaneously, businesses don't have to raise prices or fire staff to survive. But logistically, how do you force thousands of private businesses to adopt complex, multi-tiered wage mandates without sparking corporate backlash? You bring them to the table. Singapore operates on a system called tripartism, anchored by the National Wages Council. This is a coalition where the government, labor unions, and employers negotiate wage policies together until they reach a consensus. By giving employers a direct hand in designing the wage ladders for their own sectors, the system eliminates adversarial strikes. Businesses voluntarily adopt the guidelines because they helped build them. And when severe economic shocks hit, like the COVID-19 pandemic, this tripartite system relies on a vital safety valve, the flexible wage system. Under this system, worker compensation contains variable components. When a crisis destroys revenue, companies have a legal mechanism to temporarily trim pay across the board, with management taking the deepest cuts, to save jobs rather than conducting mass layoffs. This consensus-driven architecture ensures the labor market bends during recessions that would normally shatter rigid minimum wage laws. Today, the progressive wage model has expanded far beyond cleaners and landscapers. It now covers retail, food services, and even gig economy platform workers, protecting up to 90% of Singapore's full-time lower-wage workforce. The real-world impact is visible in workers like Aziza. By moving up the mandated training ladder, she advanced to a supervisor role, taking her salary from $600 to nearly $2,000 a month. But employers can't shoulder the entire burden of uplifting the lowest earners without hurting their margins. This requires a hidden pillar in the matrix known as Workfare. This flowchart illustrates how Workfare operates alongside the employer's payroll. The worker's base wage combines with a direct government cash injection, which flows straight into their take-home wallet and tops up their national retirement and housing accounts. By combining employer-paid productivity wages with state-paid workfare supplements, Singapore successfully narrows the inequality gap without stripping businesses of their margins. At its core, a traditional minimum wage dictates what a job must pay to legally exist. It changes the math, but it doesn't change the work. Singapore's strategy drives wage growth by upgrading the worker and redesigning the job itself, rather than simply mandating a higher number. This model demands heavy trade-offs. It requires massive, ongoing bureaucratic coordination, constant tripartite negotiation, and a society willing to accept higher consumer prices for daily services to support fair pay. But this exhaustive labor policy is deeply tied to Singapore's survival instinct. As a tiny island with no natural resources other than its human capital, it cannot afford to lose its global efficiency, nor can it afford to leave its working class behind. While the blunt instrument of the minimum wage remains the default choice around the globe, Singapore proves that a highly engineered, skills-based matrix offers a far more precise way to uplift a nation's most vulnerable.